All right, so we're going deep into the heart of Texas today, looking at the Home and Community-Based Services Program.
HCS.
HCS, right. And, as always, listeners are already familiar with the basics, that it aims to help Texans with disabilities, live fulfilling lives out in their communities rather than being stuck in institutions. But today we're going to see why the reality is much more, more complicated than that as we look closer at this promised a lifeline given a nightmare article.
Yeah, it's a powerful piece, isn't it? Really exposes some hard truths about the program and how it's struggling.
Definitely, yeah. Right off the bat, the article hits us with this number: 108,000 Texans, over 108,000 stuck on the HCS waitlist.
It's a staggering figure, really.
Yeah, it is, yeah. And some of these folks have been waiting 15 years. Can you imagine that? 15 years, your entire childhood spent waiting, hoping to get the support you need. It's just wrong.
And the saddest part is, as the article points out, many of them, they don't even get the chance to receive those services.
Right.
They die waiting, which just goes against the very core of what the program is supposed to be.
It's heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. And it feels like this isn't an isolated HCS problem. This feels like it's deeply connected to Texas's larger issues with healthcare, right?
Absolutely. Texas consistently ranks terribly when it comes to healthcare access, particularly for those with lower incomes. And their refusal to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act has really worsened these existing problems.
And then you add on top of that this Medicaid unwinding that the article talks about, which seemed to make a bad situation even worse. Can you explain what this unwinding is and why it's been so disastrous, especially for those with disabilities who depend on these programs like HCS?
Sure. Basically, during the pandemic, Medicaid enrollment was put on hold. When that hold was lifted, Texas had to go through and re-verify eligibility for millions of people, and, well, it's been chaotic, to say the least.
So, not exactly a smooth transition, then. It's more like pulling the rug out from under people.
Yeah, pretty much. The article states over 2 million Texans were dropped from the Medicaid rolls.
Wow.
And while some might assume those were ineligible individuals, what's truly concerning is the vast number of what are called procedural denials.
Meaning they were actually qualified, but something went wrong in the system, right?
Exactly.
So it's not even that they weren't eligible for these benefits. It's that something in the system itself, tripped them up.
Yeah, and the article actually gives a crazy statistic. Texas has a 35% procedural denial rate for Medicaid.
35%.
35%, which is, well, it's over 10 percentage points higher than the national average.
Geez, so not only are people losing coverage they should be getting, but it's like the system is almost designed to make them fail, even when they need it the most.
Yeah, it's a real problem. It's like, trying to navigate through a maze, but you're blindfolded. The article uses this phrase, Kafkaesque nightmare, to describe the HCS application process. And honestly, I think that's putting it lightly.
Yeah, no kidding. Endless paperwork, confusing procedures, ridiculous wait times.
There's a lot to handle.
It really is. And the article mentions that on average, people are waiting 88 days, almost 3 months, just for their application to even begin processing. Imagine that, waiting 3 months, not knowing what's going on. If you're going to get the help you need, the emotional toll that must take, especially on families caring for loved ones who need this, it's just, I don't know.
It's unimaginable the stress they must be going through.
Absolutely. And as if that wasn't bad enough, to add insult to injury, the article mentions that only 6%, a measly 6% of Medicaid renewals in Texas are processed automatically.
It's shockingly low.
It really is. Why is that? Why is that number so low? What's going on there?
I think it really highlights how far behind Texas is when it comes to, embracing technology that could streamline this whole thing.
Yeah.
Many other states have these automated systems, processing renewals quickly, accurately, getting rid of that human error element.
So instead of, using tech to help people, it's almost like Texas is stuck in the dark ages here, relying on these outdated systems that are they're just destined to lead to errors and delays.
That's a pretty accurate assessment, unfortunately. Right. And it all comes back to this over-reliance on doing things manually, which of course contributes to their incredibly high rate of procedural denials.
It's like they're choosing to make a difficult situation even harder.
And what we have to remember here is that these aren't just numbers we're talking about. These are real lives.
Right.
Individuals, families, people with disabilities who are stuck in this bureaucratic nightmare. And, I've seen it firsthand, actually.
Oh.
Yeah. I have a close friend, their child has disabilities, and going through the HCS system has been Well, it's been really tough on them.
I can imagine.
Endless paperwork, the fear of being denied, the constant battle, fighting for your child's needs in a system that feels designed to be impossible to navigate. It takes a toll.
I bet. And sadly, their story is just one of thousands.
Exactly.
So is there any way out of this? I mean, the article did mention these crisis diversion slots. Are those actually helping, or is it just another Band-Aid on a bullet wound?
So, in theory, crisis diversion slots are meant to fast-track access to HCS services, specifically for people in immediate danger of being institutionalized.
It's like a last resort thing to prevent the worst from happening.
Right. But the problem is there just aren't enough of them.
Not enough to meet the need.
Not even close.
So even if you're in crisis, there's no guarantee of help.
And even if a slot does open up, you still have to deal with the application process, often with little support and still no guarantee of approval.
It just seems like there's a hurdle at every turn. The article paints a pretty bleak picture overall, but, there is a small glimmer of hope mentioned. This idea of community-based care. What is that exactly, and could it be the answer? Could it fix these problems in the HCS system?
So community-based care is interesting because it's kind of a totally different way of thinking. It's about moving away from these big institutions and instead focusing on empowering people to thrive right in their own communities, giving them the support and services they need within their homes, their neighborhoods.
Makes sense, yeah. So instead of these, cold and sterile institutions, it's about integrating folks into their communities where they belong, right?
Exactly. And the article highlights these two great examples in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
The Community Living Assistance and Support Services Program, Class S, and the Texas Home Living Program, TXHML.
Okay, so these programs are already happening.
Yeah, and they offer a really wide range of services, from personal care to job training, all aimed at helping people live as independently as possible.
So it sounds like these programs really embody, the heart of what HCS was supposed to be, helping folks live fulfilling lives within their communities, not stuck in some facility somewhere. So what's the problem? Why hasn't Texas gone all in on this community-based model if it's so promising?
Well, the truth is, even these programs, good as they are, they're facing an uphill battle here. The article points to a couple of culprits we've seen before. Mm-hmm. Not enough funding, and of course, those bureaucratic roadblocks.
Those roadblocks again. It's like Texas knows what needs to be done. They see the solution, but they just can't help but trip over their own 2 feet trying to actually make it happen.
Sadly, yeah. It's a real shame because the state just hasn't shown the willingness to properly fund these community-based care programs, even though evidence suggests that not only is it a kinder approach, but it can be more cost-effective in the long run compared to institutionalization.
Wow, yeah. It always seems to come back to the money, doesn't it? A lack of political will to put the needs of, well, in this case, the most vulnerable, to put their needs first. It's like this whole article has been a huge wake-up call, and not just for Texas, but for all of us. So where do we go from here? What do we do with all this?
The goal of this deep dive is to give you, the listener, knowledge, right? But knowledge without action, it's meaningless. So stay informed. Read articles like this one, contact your elected officials, make your voice heard, let them know that these issues are important to you. And there are amazing organizations out there fighting for disability rights. Support them, donate your time or money, and most importantly, amplify the voices of those who are directly impacted by these failings. Make sure they're being heard.
Absolutely. We can't just sit back and ignore this. These aren't just numbers on a page. These are real people, real lives hanging in the balance here.
Yeah, you're right. Every single statistic in that article, it represents a person, a family, a fight for respect and support. And by understanding how the system works, how it's failing, we empower ourselves to fight for change.
And that's what it's all about, right? So this deep dive might have started in Texas, but it ends with a question for all of us, no matter where you live. How can we as a society build a system that truly supports the most vulnerable among us? A system where a promise of help doesn't end in a maze of bureaucracy, but instead creates a better future for everyone.
It's a question we all need to think about, and more importantly, a question that deserves an answer.